Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Alright, this thing is working, I think. I'm going to make this recording on my little recording device. Yeah, it's not a cell phone. I don't have a smartphone. I don't really like smartphones. They're too distracting. And it's funny because some people are not only so addicted to them, but they literally don't know how to do things like find their way around in a city without a smartphone with GPS or something. It's funny how quickly people get addicted to technology. You know, like they start out using it as just kind of a useful tool, like it augments their life, but then they become completely dependent on it. And I don't carry around a phone at all. Like, I don't walk around with a phone in my pocket, which is really nice because then I don't have to worry about people bugging me. You know, like I like to think and I like to read and I like to write. And if I was being distracted by texts or tweets or emails or whatever, when I'm trying to do those things, then I wouldn't be able to do them, or I wouldn't be able to enjoy them. I wouldn't be able to enjoy going for a walk if I was being distracted. I wouldn't be able to write if I was being distracted. And I wouldn't be able to read if I was being distracted. It's kind of sad. I think we've seen the death of books because smartphones provide us with access to all of this information that gives us a quicker fix. You know, it gives us an instant feedback, an instant hit, instant gratification that we don't get from reading. Reading requires a pretty big investment of time. You know, sometimes it requires hours to just get into the book and then more hours to finish reading it, and you have to do it over a period of days. But the thing about reading a book is that you can express much more complex ideas in a book than you can express in a tweet or a meme, you know, a meme in the sense of some little picture with some text on it, or in a blog post, you know, or in a little article or a YouTube video, you know. I love books. I really do. Many years ago, when I was in college, I had a part-time job working in the library. And, you know, university libraries have a lot of books. And if you think about it, it's kind of mind-boggling. Each book represents a significant slice of somebody's life. Like any given book, whether it's a book on, I don't know, analog circuitry, or the history of the Ottoman Empire, or, I don't know, literary analysis of T.S. Eliot or something. Whatever it is, that book contains years of work, years of mental effort, usually by one person, and then, of course, with some editing or help from others. But it represents a big chunk of somebody's life. And that's the way I used to think about it. I used to walk through the stacks and kind of run my hand over the books, you know, when I was going to put books away. And every now and then I would pull one out and look at it. And I would think, you know, this author spent maybe 3 years of his life writing this book on, I don't know, cognitive linguistics, let's say. Reminds me of a book I used to take out from the library from time to time that I never fully read all the way through, called, I think, Cognitive Grammar by a linguist called Lanneker. And, that was probably his life's work. That wasn't just something he whipped out in a couple of days or in a week or in a month. That was like the culmination of years and years of research. But I couldn't even get through it. It was a little bit densely worded, and anyway. But parts of it were very interesting. I don't want to talk about that book because that would take me off on tangents. But the thing is that guy put a huge amount of his life into processing ideas and generating words to express his ideas to try and communicate something to others. And the sad truth is that usually that is a failed effort. Most books just sit on the shelf, very few people read them, and that attempt, that effort to communicate with others something that you deem important fails. So it's kind of sad, like in a way the library is like a graveyard of ideas and of thinkers. It's almost like where years of their lives are just stuck on a shelf and rarely ever read. That's the other tragic thing about libraries, is that so many books almost never get taken out. In the olden days, you could tell that because inside the book there was a little paper slip and it had ink dates stamped on it. Because, they would stamp the date, you had to bring it back. They don't do that anymore, but I'm old, so I remember that stuff. And, anyway, so that's going the way of the dodo, I guess. The book is going the way of the dodo, and that's kind of sad. But it's not being replaced by something better, and that's the other part of the tragedy. You could say that books are kind of clunky. They're a clunky instrument. And that's true. There actually are very few good books. I have to admit that. I love books, but it's really hard to write a good book because it is so big. It is such a giant undertaking, and most books have a lot of interconnections. They're worlds unto themselves, and so it's pretty easy to fuck up that world. To violate its internal rules of consistency, to contradict yourself, or to just make it boring, by trying to be too consistent. Or just by dumping out too much information. Or maybe you leave out critical information, and it doesn't make sense. Maybe you imagine that your reader has information that you have, or has certain assumptions that you have in your head, but the reader doesn't, and so when they go to read it, it's just gibberish, it makes no sense, and they just close the book, put it back on the shelf, and go on. And so, so books are tragic. The book is a symbol of tragedy, in a way. And a lot of good books are kind of tragic, and a lot of authors have tragic lives. It's kind of funny how many authors have tragic lives. I don't mean that it's funny in the sense of being humorous. It's just kind of interesting / strange that writing, maybe it's not really that strange on reflection, but writing is a very lonely pursuit, and I think it's probably a depressing pursuit, because you put an enormous amount of effort into something, and then nobody reads it. Like, even though, that university library was full of, I don't know how many thousands of books, for every book that is published, there must be 10 that are written and never published. And sure, 5 of those are, coming-of-age novels written by 22-year-olds or something like that, which, that's probably, you probably don't want to publish those. But every one of them has something in it that's worth reading. I mean, every one of them has some good stuff in it, I'm sure. Well, maybe not every one of them, but, there's nothing wrong with coming-of-age novels. That's probably the best kind of novel, actually, or it's one of the best kinds of novels. I have a sort of quasi-fictional coming-of-age novel that I'm trying to read. It's by a woman, can't remember her name, but that's just kind of a weird novel, but I don't know, it's the point of a novel is that you're connecting with somebody else's subjective experiences. The point of a novel is to convey what it's like to be someone else. Whether that's imaginative, like whether the author just imagined another character and they're sharing this imagined experience with you, or they're sharing their own experiences. And I think in a way, when people share their own experiences, that's actually better. And most people do put their own experiences into their fictional characters. So a lot of the time, novels are thinly disguised autobiography. They're somewhat autobiographical, but not entirely, because the author doesn't want to give away everything, Writing an autobiography would be... I mean, a lot of people might think it's pretentious to do that, but it's actually kind of brave, especially if you're nobody, right? I mean, if you're famous and you write an autobiography, well, that's pretty much expected. So, and people are going to read it, so it's not a big deal. But if you're a nobody, if you're just like some guy that just lives out his lonely life of quiet desperation, and you write about your experiences, you write your life down in a novel, that might actually be a really good historical artifact, That's actually more interesting, in a way. I mean, the lives of great people or famous people are not representative. They don't tell us what life is actually like for real, ordinary people. But then, the sad truth is that, well, first of all, ordinary people don't write books. And then secondly, ordinary people's subjectivity is actually pretty boring. There isn't much going on inside it. The average person isn't that bright. And, they don't really think that much. They experience things, but their experiences are fairly superficial. There's no great meaning to their experiences. Yeah, but even that might be kind of interesting to explore. Like, actually, when I was young, I thought about becoming a writer, or I wanted to be a writer. And you can probably tell that. And the reason why is because it's frustrated self-expression. And it's living my whole life without ever being able to be honest and to express my true feelings and my true thoughts. Because I am very nonconformist in my beliefs. I don't believe what other people believe. And I have been an iconoclast since I was a kid, since I was like around 8 years old, I guess. I've been drifting away from the mainstream of humanity since I was even younger than that, really. I mean, since I was born, I guess. So what that means is that, you know, I'm lonely and I don't have anybody to talk to because my views on everything are weird. You know, they just don't fit what other people believe. And I learned a long time ago there's no point trying to persuade people. You know, you can't change minds because the way that people develop their worldviews is a kind of crystallization process. And there's actually some pruning that goes on in your brain as you go through adolescence and early adulthood. I think you have like a growth of neurons and maybe a branching of neurons. I don't remember the exact details, but there's some growth in your brain as you go through puberty. And early adulthood, I think it might still be growing, but then it starts to get pruned. Your brain prunes away things that you don't use, connections that you don't use, pathways that you don't use. And this kind of fixes your worldview. It kind of entrenches it. So I think that's why people end up going to such great effort to come up with these elaborate justifications for believing in things that are contradictory or completely at odds with the evidence. And you'll see this, right? You'll see this in people where you'll point something out to them that they obviously never really thought about. Like, let's say it's a leftist or a left liberal, because you'll never have a conversation with an actual leftist. They're just too far gone. But let's say you're having a conversation with a lefty liberal, and you start making, say, I don't know, race realist arguments or arguments against socialism, pro-capitalist arguments that they've never heard before, right? So once you make arguments that these people have never been exposed to, that contradict the premises of their worldview, the foundational assumptions, then they go kind of crazy, right? They experience cognitive dissonance, and then they start scrambling to find a way to make sense of what you're saying without changing the foundations of their worldview. And I think the reason why is because they can't change those foundations, or it's very, very difficult to do it. It's almost like you're demanding that they grow more neural tissue, you know, or that they go back to being adolescent at a time when the brain is still fairly plastic. And I don't know, maybe I don't really have that. Maybe I kind of skipped that because, you know, maybe I didn't have the pruning. Maybe I've got some weird defect which didn't do that, because I've been thinking about a lot of things. Well, okay, it's also that when I was young, I really put some effort into coming up with a rational worldview. Like before I went through adolescence, before I was an adult. Like when I was in my teens. And so maybe that's part of it. Maybe I am fixed in my worldview, but my worldview is very well constructed. It's not ad hoc. It's not just like most people's worldviews are kind of ad hoc. You know, it's just what they grew up with and a few extra things thrown in there, you know. without any attempt to make the whole thing coherent or fit together or logically consistent or whatever. But I still think that, I don't know, like I'm still very creative and I still almost in a way prefer children to adults. I joke around with them. Yeah, I like kids because they have those beginner minds, and they really appreciate weirdness. They appreciate creativity. They appreciate weird games and stuff. But this is a tangent, so let me go back to what I was talking about. Worldviews being fixed. People being trapped in them. Yeah, and that's why they confabulate and spin these crazy webs of words to try and avoid an obvious conclusion. Because if the conclusion contradicts a fundamental premise of their worldview, then it's like almost impossible to accept. It's like you're asking them to move, to just like tear down the foundations of their existence and completely rethink their worldview. And yeah, I mean, most people aren't going to do that. And they're going to hate you for pointing out that their worldview is, that it's pretty shitty. And usually that's also attacking their identity, because most people's worldview is bound up in their identity. Because if you think about it, in a sense, your worldview is your identity. The boundaries of your thought, in a sense, constitute your identity. Because if you think about identity as the self, and if you think about the self as will and awareness, and thus the self is the range of possible interpretations. So in other words, the things you can be aware of, the things you can understand, the ways you can see the world, and also the things that you can choose. So it gives you the range of alternatives that are available to you as a consciousness, as a subjectivity. So those are the boundaries of the self, right? The things that you can't choose because they are kind of nailed down in your worldview are what define who you are. And the things that you can't believe or can't not believe because, again, they're nailed down in your worldview or excluded from it, those also define you, right? So in a sense, your identity is defined by the assumptions of your worldview. And any questioning of those assumptions is an attack on your identity. Or at least it feels like that. It feels like somebody is attacking you. And it creates cognitive dissonance, which, probably feels really bad. So anyway, you can't really change people's minds. How did I get off on that tangent? Oh yeah, being alone, being lonely, right? So I just go with the flow when I'm around ordinary people. But, obviously in my head, I'm thinking, yeah, no, that's wrong. And the same thing when I listen to the TV or the radio or any other media, which I don't really that much anymore, but I always find flaws in what they're saying or how they're saying it. Even simple things like the fact that the business news media are always calling it good when stocks go up in price and bad when they go down, or good when houses get more expensive and bad when they get cheaper. And this is just fucking insane. It just pisses me off, because it's so fucking stupid. It's like, don't these retards understand that they're that you have to have buyers for sellers and sellers for buyers. And so, like, there's no gain when prices go up, and there's no loss when they go down. Like, there's no general benefit or cost to these things. It's just a relative shift in various asset prices. I don't know. It's just fucking annoying to hear them talk about this shit that they clearly don't understand, and then they're just misleading everybody, right? So most of the shit I have to listen to on a daily basis, whether it's in the media or it's the kind of shit that ordinary people say to each other, something comes into my mind to retort or to correct them or whatever. But then I think, no, there's no point. I mean, every now and then I do make arguments, but even then, I'm holding back, because I have to think inside their framework. I can't think inside my framework and just verbalize my thoughts, because they wouldn't make sense to other people. So that's why I always wanted to be a writer, because I was always alone. I could never express myself, and I always wanted to express myself, and also share my subjectivity, and not just my thoughts, but my experiences in general, my feelings, my sensory experiences of my life. I've actually had a very rich life. I've done a lot of things, seen a lot of things. But sometimes it's just a moment, it's just a moment, like sitting on a cliffside, eating a peanut butter sandwich, looking down at the ocean below, watching a seal, diving for fish and then coming up, and then diving back down again. This cliff is on a quiet inlet on the west coast of British Columbia, so the water is calm, but it's the sea, so it's full of life. And you have birds calling, ravens maybe flying by. The smell of the earth, the moss, the trees, the ocean, all mixed together. Being a kid, being 17 or 16 or whatever, sitting on a mountainside next to an inlet, watching a seal. Things like that, little experiences, little moments. Yeah, because I've lived a very solitary life. Even when I'm around other people, I'm really in my own head and keeping to myself. And it's partly because I'm sort of introverted, but mainly it's because I can't just speak, just be myself. I can't be myself. People will, tell me, oh no, you can't believe that, you can't think that. You're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to feel that way. It's like you'll be policed. You'll be thought policed by the crowd, if you don't conform to the crowd. But most people want to conform to the crowd anyway. I mean, they don't have much of a mind of their own. Their identity is handed to them. Their self is handed to them because they get those constraints on their worldview from those around them, from their culture. That's what happens when you conform, right? You in a sense become like everybody else. You share in this collective identity. You are going to conform to it, and you are going to become it. You're going to be like everybody else, and you're going to fit into the culture and the society. You're going to plug right in because you're the same. Anyway, I never wanted to give up my personhood in that way, and I don't think I could have. And I'm too weird biologically, neurologically, probably, for that to ever work anyway. I'm not sure how I got onto this, starting with books and writing, but I mean, I know how I got here. I'm just not sure how to wrap it up and make it into a coherent package, but maybe I won't try. Maybe I'll just let it hang, let it end now.